Europe stayed a continent because the people drawing the maps lived in Europe. It's that simple. How many continents are there in the world? And should Europe even be included in this count? If you went to school in the United States, you probably said 7. If you grew up in Russia or Japan, you might have said 6. Parts of Latin America teach 5, and some models say 4. And that should already feel a little strange because we treat the continents like they're facts, like they're built into the planet. But if they were, everyone would agree on the number. Thing is, everyone doesn't agree on the number. So what's going on, and why is Europe, a peninsula attached to the largest landmass on Earth, counted as a continent at all? I've been working with maps for over 25 years, and the more I've thought about this question, the more I've realized that what makes a continent has never actually been settled. There is no scientific definition, no governing body, no rule book. So let's try to make one. Let's take every criteria that people use to define a continent and just apply them honestly. Let's see what holds up. Before we even get to the criteria, look at how messy this is. In the United States, we say Australia is a continent. In parts of Latin America and Southern Europe, the continent is called Oceania, and Australia is a country inside it. In some models, Oceania includes thousands of Pacific islands. In others, it's just Australia with a different name. Same landmass, different name with different boundaries, depending on where you were born. The Americas. In the United States, that's 2 continents, North and South. In most of Latin America, it's 1, just America. So depending on the textbook, the Western Hemisphere has 1 or 2 continents. Eurasia is the same story. Russia teaches it as 1 continent. The United States teaches it as 2. Same body of land, different answer about whether or how it splits. We can't even agree on what to call the continents, let alone how to count them. So before we ask whether Europe is a continent, we should be honest about the fact that this whole system is held together with duct tape. Okay, now let's try to make a rule. Criteria number 1, size. A continent should be a large landmass. Fair enough, but how large? Europe is about 10.2 million square kilometers. Australia is about 7.7 million. Greenland is about 2.2 million. It's not a continent. India is about 3.3 million, also not a continent, even though it sits on its own tectonic plate. So the size alone isn't doing the work. There's no threshold. Criteria number 2, tectonic plates. Continents sit on their own tectonic plates. Australia has its own tectonic plate. North America has its own plate. Antarctica has its own plate. South America has its own plate. Europe does not have its own tectonic plate. It sits on the Eurasian plate. The name of that plate literally gives you an answer. But it gets even weirder. India has its own plate, and Arabia has its own plate, and the Caribbean has its own plate. If tectonic plates were the rule, India would be a continent, and Europe wouldn't. Nobody teaches it that way. Criteria number 3, separation by water. Continents are land masses surrounded by water. Antarctica, completely surrounded by water. Australia, completely surrounded. North and South America, connected by a narrow strip of land, but otherwise surrounded by water. You can make a case. But Europe, attached to Asia across a land boundary thousands of kilometers wide. There's no water, not even close. The boundary we use, the Ural Mountains, is a modest range in the middle of a country. Russia itself sits on both sides of it. Since when do mountains separate continents? The Andes run the entire length of South America, and they don't split it in 2. The Rockies don't split North America, and the Himalayas don't split Asia. So why do the Urals get to be a continental boundary? If you didn't already know that Europe was a continent and someone showed you a physical map of the world with no labels, no borders, just the shape of the land, would you look at that Western Peninsula and say, yes, that is its own continent? Or would you see one giant landmass? Every criteria we apply, Europe fails. So where did this idea come from? It came from the ancient Greeks. 2,500 years ago, Greek geographers looked out at the world from the Aegean Sea. To their west was the landmass they lived on. To their east, across the water, was another one. They called the western one Europe, and they called the eastern one Asia. And later they added the land to the south. 3 continents, built around the 3 landmasses they could see from the Mediterranean. That's it. That's the origin story. It wasn't geology. It wasn't tectonics. It was the view of a few guys from one boat on one sea. And here's what happened next. 2,000 years later, European mapmakers and scholars during the Enlightenment, the Age of Empire, inherited that framework. And instead of revisiting it, they reinforced it. They drew the maps. They wrote the textbooks. They decided where Europe ended and Asia began. Europe stayed a continent because the people drawing the maps lived in Europe. It's that simple. Now, I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm just a map maker. I make maps. I print maps that show 7 continents because that's what the market expects. And every time I do, I think about this. Because the map you grew up with didn't just show you the world, it told you how to organize it, how to categorize it, how to rank it. And most of us never questioned it, because why would you? It was in the textbook. The next time someone tells you there are 7 continents, just know that's one answer, but it's not the only one. Every map is a set of choices, and this is one of them.